The call came on a Tuesday, not from my mother. From my brother Carson, which should have been my first sign that whatever was coming wasn't going to be pretty. He opened with small talk. "How's work? How's the apartment? Did I catch the game Sunday?" We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, which wasn't unusual. We were never close in the way that people mean when they say close. We shared a childhood, some holidays, a last name. That was most of it. Then he said, "So about Mom's birthday party." Mom was turning 60. The party had been planned for 2 months. My aunt was flying in from Phoenix. My cousin was driving up from San Antonio. It was a Saturday afternoon thing at my parents' house in Round Rock, 22 miles north of Austin, the house I grew up in. I said, "Yeah, what about it?" He paused. "Serena's going to be there." I didn't know who Serena was. He'd mentioned dating someone, but hadn't given a name, hadn't said much of anything. I waited. "She's in hospitality management," he said. "Hotel development, that kind of thing, it's serious. And I want to make a good impression. On her family eventually." And another pause. "I think it would be easier if it were just the immediate family. Small. Relaxed." "I am immediate family," I said. I know that, but you know how these things go. She's going to ask what everyone does and," he stopped himself, then kept going anyway. "You know, it might be a little awkward to explain." I'd been standing in my garage when he called. I still had my tool bag on my shoulder. I set it down on the workbench, slow, the way you set something down when your hands have gone slightly numb. "My job," I said. "Delaney." "Say it, Carson." He exhaled through his nose. I could hear it. "She works with a lot of high-end developers, corporate people. I just don't want her to think. I don't want it to be weird. My job is electrical contracting. I'm a licensed master electrician. I started my own company, Calloway Electric, 5 years ago. At the time of this phone call, we had 14 employees, 2 active commercial jobs, and 1 residential high-end renovation. Our revenue for the year would come in at $1.84 million. None of that is what my brother pictured when he thought about my job. What he pictured was probably this: a woman in a gray uniform carrying a wire stripper, pulling overtime at someone else's job site. Someone who smelled like electrical tape and couldn't hold a conversation about anything that mattered to the people he was trying to impress. "I'll stay home," I said. "Delaney, don't be." "No, it's fine. Tell Mom I'll come by another time." He thanked me. I hung up. I stood in the garage for a while. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly. Something wrong in the ballast. Something I'd been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. My work boots were by the door, steel-toed, scuffed at the toe from where I'd caught a steel beam wrong last spring. I looked at them. Then I went inside. I was 20 years old when I told my parents I wasn't going back to UT. I'd finished 1 year, 1 semester, dropped 2 classes in the second semester, and by the end of it I knew that 4 more years of sitting in lecture halls wasn't what I wanted from my life. I also knew what I wanted instead, and I knew exactly how my parents were going to feel about it. We were eating dinner. My dad was cutting his chicken. My mom had just refilled her iced tea. I said, "I'm going to apply to an electrical apprenticeship program." My dad put his fork down. My mom said, "An electrical what?" "A 5-year apprenticeship through the IBEI," I explained. "I'd work under journeymen, earn while I learned, come out the other end with a journeyman's license and real-world experience. No student loans, no 4-year degree I wasn't sure what to do with." My dad was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a hard way to make a living, Delaney." "It pays well," I said. "For now," my mom said, not unkindly. She'd been a school district administrator for 18 years. She believed in credentials, in institutions, in the kind of career you could explain at a dinner party. "But you'll hit a ceiling, and the physical wear." "I want to do this." My brother Carson, who was 17 and eating a second helping of mashed potatoes, looked up. "You're going to be an electrician, like come to people's houses and fix outlets." I said yes. He shrugged and went back to his food. My mother smiled, the smile that meant she'd made peace with something she disagreed with. "Well," she said, "we support whatever you decide." She asked Carson if he'd heard back from his college counselor. I enrolled in the apprenticeship program in January. I was the only woman in my cohort. That's a separate story. The thing about being invisible in your own family is that it happens so slowly you almost don't notice. It's not one moment, it's 1,000 small ones. Every Sunday dinner, my mom asked Carson about his job. He'd gotten into commercial real estate, 3 years, out of college. Decent salary, company car, expense account. She asked about his deals, his pipeline, whether the market was soft or hot, who he'd had lunch with that week. She asked me, "How's work, honey?" Not, "What are you working on?" Not, "How's the company doing?" Just, "How's work?" The conversational equivalent of a pat on the head. When I got my journeyman's license at 24, I told them at Sunday dinner. My dad said, "That's great, sweetheart." My mom said, "Does that mean you get a raise?" Carson was on his phone. When I got my master electrician's license at 26, I told them at Sunday dinner. My mom said, "Is that the highest one?" I said yes. She said, "Oh, that's nice," and asked Carson if he was going to the firm's conference in Denver. When I filed the LLC paperwork for Calloway Electric at 27, I brought the certificate to dinner. My dad held it, turned it over, handed it back. "Your own business," he said. "That's a big step. Be careful. Most small businesses don't make it past year 3. "I know," I said. My mom asked Carson if he'd found a new apartment yet. After that, I stopped bringing things to Sunday dinner. Year 1 was hard, in the way that everyone who started something from nothing understands. You do everything yourself. You bid the jobs and run the wire and deal with the inspectors and invoice the clients and chase the payments and fix the problems and then start over Monday morning. I had a used white work van, a set of tools I'd collected over 5 years in the field, and a state contractor's license. I had $14,000 in savings and a line of credit I was terrified to touch. I had a part-time bookkeeper named Bobby who worked out of his living room and kept my numbers clean. First-year revenue, $186,000. I paid myself $38,000. I felt like I'd won something. Year 2. I hired my first full-time employee, an electrician named Hector, who'd been doing residential work for 12 years and was tired of working for people who didn't respect the trade. He was better than me at rough-in work. I told him that. He seemed surprised that I said it. Year 3 was the turn. I landed my first commercial contract through a referral. An office build-out in downtown Austin, 8,400 square feet, $96,000 scope. It took 4 months and came in on time and $4,000 under budget. The general contractor referred me to 2 more clients. By the end of year 3, I had 6 employees and $720,000 in revenue. I didn't tell my parents the numbers. At Sunday dinner, I said the company was doing well. My mom said, "That's wonderful." My dad said, "Just don't forget to set aside for quarterly taxes." Carson said he was thinking about leasing a BMW. Year 4, I expanded the crew, moved into a real office, hired a project manager so I could step back from running every wire personally. I bought a house in East Austin, 100 square feet, needed work, and I did most of it myself over 3 months. Year 5, this year, Calloway Electric was projected at $1.84 million, 14 employees, 4 active commercial jobs, and in September, the contract I was most proud of, the Hargrove Theater. The Hargrove is a 1931 vaudeville theater in downtown Austin that's been closed since 2009. The Austin Heritage Foundation spent 3 years raising money to restore it. When they finally broke ground, they needed an electrical contractor who understood historic preservation. Someone who could update the entire wiring and lighting system without erasing what made the building itself. I got a call from the project coordinator in late August. Her name was Serena Park. We talked on the phone for 45 minutes. She'd done her homework, had my licensing information, my insurance certificates, 2 references she'd already called. She asked smart questions, whether I'd worked on historic structures before, whether I could source period-appropriate fixtures, whether I understood that the Austin Historic Landmark Commission had approval rights over any visible electrical elements. At the end of the call, she said, "I'll recommend you to the board." Contract signed October 3rd, $268,000 scope, the largest contract in Calloway Electric's history. Serena and I communicated primarily by email. She was efficient, organized, and didn't waste my time. She signed her emails Serena Park, Project Coordinator, Austin Heritage Foundation. I signed mine D. Calloway, owner Calloway Electric. We had 2 phone calls and 1 site walk. At the site walk, I was in jeans and a hard hat, standing in what used to be the orchestra pit, explaining conduit routing to her. She took notes and asked good questions. She never asked what the D stood for. I never offered. In November, she mentioned during a phone call that she'd started seeing someone. He worked in commercial real estate. She said it. The way you say things that have become relevant enough to mention, but not enough to dwell on. I said, "That's great," and we moved on to the question of whether the dimmer panels could be concealed behind the original wainscoting. My brother's name didn't occur to me. Why would it? Carson knew nothing about the Hargrove project. I didn't talk to Carson about my projects. I didn't talk to Carson about much of anything. My mom's 60th birthday party was on a Saturday in December. I spent the day at the Hargrove. I got there at 7:30 in the morning. The theater was cold. The HVAC wouldn't be operational until next month, and it smelled like plaster, dust, and old wood, and something I'd always associated with buildings that had held a lot of life inside them. I put on my headlamp and my work jacket, and went to the mezzanine level, where Hector and I were running conduit for the new house lighting system. I worked until 2 in the afternoon. Then I sat in the empty theater, in one of the original seats the foundation had kept for preservation, and ate a breakfast taco I'd bought from the truck outside and forgotten about until now. The stage was bare. The ceiling above me was a painted plaster dome, cracked in places, restored in others. When this building reopened, people would sit here and feel something. That mattered to me, in a way I didn't always have the right words for. My phone buzzed. A group text from my family, photos from the party, my mom in a paper crown, laughing, Carson and his girlfriend standing in the living room, her arm through his, my dad grilling something in the backyard, my aunt with a glass of wine, mid-sentence. I looked at the photos for a long time, then I put my phone back in my jacket pocket and went back to work. The Hargrove Theater reopening gala was on a Friday evening in January. Black tie optional, 200 tickets. The Austin Heritage Foundation had been selling tables at $1,500 each for 2 months. I was invited because I built it. I don't own a lot of formal clothes. I bought a blazer and dress, pants, from a store in the Barton Creek Mall the week before, tried them on in my car in the parking lot because I'd bought them during a lunch break and didn't have time to go back to the office. They fit fine. I wore flats because I was going to be standing for 3 hours. I arrived at 6:15. The Hargrove looked the way a building looks when it's been given back to itself. The marquee was lit. The tile work in the lobby gleamed. The brass railings caught the light. I'd walked through this building in hard hat and work jacket enough times that seeing it like this, full of people in nice clothes, chandeliers on, the old terrazzo floors polished and bright, made my chest do something complicated. I found my seat at table 7, had a glass of water, talked to the project architect about the lighting specs. At 6:45, I looked across the room. Table 12, near the back. My brother, my mother, my father, and Serena. My mother was wearing a dress I'd never seen. My dad looked the way he always looks at events. Formal in the way of someone who doesn't attend many. Carson was in a navy jacket, talking to someone beside him. And Serena, the woman who'd been on the phone with me about conduit routing and dimmer panels for 4 months, was in a burgundy dress, hair pinned back, laughing at something my brother said. I understood everything in about 4 seconds. I turned back to my table. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. Dinner was served. Salmon, better than I expected. I ate and talked and watched, without watching, as my family existed 20 feet away with no idea I was in the room. At 7:40, the foundation president took the podium. She talked about the history of the Hargrove, about the community fundraising, about what the theater had meant to Austin before it closed and what it would mean now. Then she said, the foundation wanted to recognize the contractors whose work made the restoration possible. She said a lot of names: architects, engineers, the general contractor, the tile restoration specialist. Then she said, and for electrical restoration and lighting design, Calloway Electric. We'd like to invite the owner, Delaney Calloway, to say a few words. The room applauded. I stood up. Across the room, I heard nothing specifically, but I saw it. Serena turned toward the stage. Her expression shifted the way expressions shift when something doesn't match. She looked at me. She looked back at her program. She looked at Carson. I watched her say something to him. Watched his head turn toward the stage. Watched him see me. His face did what I expected. Confusion first, then recognition, then something I didn't have a name for. I walked to the stage. I shook the foundation president's hand. I stood at the podium and looked out at 200 people, the restored plaster dome above us, the chandeliers casting the same color of light they would have cast here 90 years ago. I kept it short. Thank you, I said. The Hargrove asked us to make its bones work again without taking anything away from what made it worth saving. That's the best kind of problem to solve. To the foundation, to Serena Park and her team, to every person at Calloway Electric who worked this job, thank you for caring about this building as much as I did. I walked back to my table. Someone handed me a glass of wine. I sat down and I breathed. My mother found me during the cocktail hour. She came alone. Her face was doing something I'd never quite seen it do. The tight-set jaw she got when she was holding herself together, but underneath it something rawer. She looked around the lobby, at the tile, the chandeliers, the restored marquee, visible through the glass doors. I didn't know you'd be here, she said. I know. Delaney. Her voice came out wrong, too quiet. Did your company do all of this? Yes. She looked at me. How long has it been this big? Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. She was 60 years old. She'd managed a school district's administrative office for 18 years and watched her opinions about the budget get set aside by people with fewer years and louder voices. She'd pushed us toward office jobs because she thought that was where the respect lived. I did tell you, I said, every year. You asked how work was, I said fine, and you moved on to Carson. Her eyes went shiny. She didn't say anything. I stopped trying to get you to see it, I said, but I kept building it anyway. Carson appeared at her shoulder. His jacket was slightly rumpled now, the way jackets get when the evening has gone sideways. He looked at me, and then away, then back. I didn't know, he said. You never asked. Delaney. You had me uninvited from Mom's birthday because my job would embarrass you. My voice was calm. I'd been carrying this long enough that the anger had gone past heat and come out the other side as something harder and quieter. Meanwhile, I'd been signing your girlfriend's project documents for 4 months. His jaw tightened. I didn't know you were involved in this project. Because you don't know anything about what I do, you never asked. My dad had appeared at some point. He was standing slightly behind my mom, hand on her shoulder. He looked at the lobby, the tile, the chandeliers, and then back at me. Your company did this, he said, not a question. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I should have paid attention, he said. I'm sorry. That was the most my dad had said to me, directly, in years. I said, I need to get back to my table. Serena found me near the coat check. Can I have 5 minutes? She said. We stepped into a side hallway, near a door that led to the backstage corridor. The noise from the party muffled behind us. She clasped her hands in front of her. I've been working with Dee Calloway for 4 months, she said. I didn't know Dee was Delaney. I didn't know Delaney was Carson's sister. She paused. I assumed the owner of the electrical company was a man. I know, I said. I'm embarrassed by that. I looked at her. It wasn't the first time someone had made that assumption, and it wasn't going to be the last. I'd spent enough years being the only woman on job sites to know that being angry at every individual instance of it was a full-time job I didn't have the bandwidth for. What did Carson tell you about me? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. He said you'd never really had direction, that you'd done okay, but you weren't. She stopped. Say it. He said you weren't someone who applied yourself. The words sat there between us. I didn't say anything. Serena looked at me steadily. We have been coordinating this project since October. Your crew was on site 6 days a week. Your lighting documentation was so thorough that the Landmark Commission approved it in one review. The architect told me that almost never happens. She shook her head. That's not someone without direction. I nodded once. She reached into her clutch and took out a business card. I'm leaving early tonight, she said, and I won't be seeing Carson after this. She held the card out. We have 2 more restoration projects coming through the foundation. I'd like to bring Calloway Electric in for the initial consult on both of them. I took the card. The paper was thick, good stock. She walked back toward the party. I stood in the hallway until the sounds from the ballroom settled back to something normal, and then I got my coat and went out through the side door. Emails came over the next 4 days. My dad wrote first, the morning after the gala. He said he'd been trying to find the right words and hadn't managed it, so he was going to say the incomplete version. He hadn't paid attention. He'd asked about Carson's job because he understood it, and hadn't asked about mine because he'd assumed he did. He said he was wrong about that. He signed it Dad, not his full name Dad. He hadn't signed anything that way in years. My mom texted 2 days later, "Can we meet, just us?" I said yes. We met at a coffee shop on South Congress, the kind of place with brick walls and pour-over coffee, and a line out the door on Saturdays. She was there before me. She looked tired the way people look when they've been sitting with something heavy for too many consecutive nights. We sat down. She ordered coffee. We didn't talk about the gala at first. She asked about the Hargrove, what it had been like to work inside a building that old. She asked real questions. What had the wiring looked like when we opened the walls? How did you know what the original fixtures would have looked like? I answered them without the guardedness I'd been carrying for years around her. Then she said, I pushed you toward what I already understood, and I never tried to understand what you were doing. I wrapped my hands around my cup and looked at her. I thought a trade meant a ceiling, she said. I thought you'd work hard your whole life and not get the credit for it. That was my fear, not your failure. She shook her head slowly. I got it completely backwards. I needed you to see the work, I said. Not just whether it was respectable, the work itself. She nodded. I'd like to, if you'll let me. We stayed at that table for close to an hour. I told her about the theater, what it had looked like the first time I walked through it. Plastered dust and old wire everywhere, and what it had looked like last Friday night. She listened the way you listen when you're actually trying to hold on to something. When we stood to leave, I said, "I'll come to Easter, but I need things to be different. If anyone makes a joke about my job or talks around it or treats it like the lesser thing in the room, I'll leave, and I won't perform for you. I won't dress different or talk about what I do less. This is who I am." She held my gaze. "That's more than enough," she said quietly. "I know it is," I said. "I just needed you to know it too." We split the check. She hugged me on the sidewalk, and I let her. It wasn't everything. It was a beginning. Carson left 2 voicemails over the following week. I listened to both. The first one was defensive. The second one, 4 days later, was different. Quieter. And, with something underneath it, I hadn't heard from him since we were kids. He said he'd been doing an accounting of himself that he didn't enjoy. He said he was sorry. Not the kind of sorry that's really just asking you to move on. The kind that costs something to say. I texted back, "Not yet, give it time." He replied, "Okay." I meant both parts. It's April now. The Hargrove has been open for 3 months. I went to see a show there last month, a jazz quartet on a Thursday night, the house about half full, and I sat in the 4th row and watched the lights do exactly what we'd designed them to do, and I felt the particular kind of satisfaction that comes from work that outlasts the doing of it. The first foundation, consult with Serena, went well. The second project starts in June. My parents came to the office last month to see the space. My mom stood in front of the project photo wall. Job sites, finished interiors, permits and commission approvals, framed next to finished shots of the Hargrove chandelier at full brightness, and looked at every single one. My dad sat down with Bobby and asked real questions about the revenue model, and then listened to the whole answer without interrupting. It wasn't everything, but it was more than I'd had. Carson and I talked on the phone 2 weeks ago. 20 minutes. He asked about the upcoming project. I told him the scope and the timeline. He said, "That's impressive, Delaney." I said, "I know. I've been building that for a long time." It was never the question. The question was always whether anyone around me was paying attention, and what I was going to do with my life while they weren't. I know the answer to both of those now.